My sister walked into my wedding exactly 90 minutes late, on the arm of the man she had stolen from me. She crossed the entire dance floor in a silver sequin dress, diamond necklace, and that smile. That smile I had known my whole life. The one that said, I win. You lose. You always lose. She stopped right in front of my head table, in front of 200 guests, and said, You traded a millionaire for a pathetic waiter, Grace. You're a loser. You always have been. And the room laughed. My new husband leaned close to my ear and whispered 4 words that changed everything. Should we tell them? I looked at my sister. I looked at the man she'd stolen from me, spinning his Ferrari key fob around his finger like a trophy, and I said, No. Let me. What I said next didn't just silence the room. It ended my sister's entire carefully constructed life in 60 seconds flat. Stay with me, because this story starts a long time before that wedding day. And every single detail matters. My name is Grace, and for 26 years, I lived in the shadow of a sister who treated my life like a clearance rack she could raid whenever something of mine caught her eye. Her name was Chloe, younger than me by 3 years. And from the time we were children, the rules in our house were simple and unspoken. Chloe was the beautiful one. Chloe was the interesting one. Chloe was the one with a future worth talking about at dinner parties. I was just there. I don't say that to make you feel sorry for me. I say it because you need to understand the atmosphere I grew up in, the specific kind of invisible I had learned to be, before you can truly understand what my sister did, and why it hit the way it did. My mother, Sandra, was a woman who measured love in appearances. She had grown up with very little and had spent her entire adult life clawing her way into a social circle that would never fully accept her. So she raised Chloe to be the daughter who would finally make her feel like she'd arrived. I was the trial run. Chloe was the masterpiece. If I saved up 3 months of paychecks and bought myself a coat I loved, a deep burgundy wool coat that made me feel, for the first time in a long time, like I actually looked good, Chloe would show up 2 weeks later in the same coat. Designer version. Better buttons. Compliments at every family dinner. If I got a promotion, she'd announce her own news at the exact same moment. If I painted my apartment, she'd renovate her entire condo. It sounds petty when I list it out like that. Maybe even unbelievable. But those of you who grew up with a sister like Chloe, you know exactly the specific exhaustion I'm talking about. The kind that doesn't just tire your body. It tires your sense of self. I had learned to keep my good news quiet, to protect things before she could get to them. But I didn't protect the one thing that mattered most. And that was my mistake. I met Julian at a charity fundraiser 2 years ago. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and instantly became the gravitational center of it. Tall, sharply dressed, a heavy gold watch on his left wrist, and the easy, unshakable confidence of someone who had never once worried about a bill in his life. He told me on our first date that his family had been in commercial real estate development for 3 generations. That he had grown up between a penthouse in Manhattan and a villa in Florida. That he drove a red Ferrari, not to show off, he laughed, but because he simply liked fast things. I was careful with him. I kept waiting for the catch. For the moment he would show me who he really was underneath all of that shine. But he was charming. Attentive. He remembered small details. My coffee order, the name of my childhood dog, the anniversary of my father's passing. He sent flowers to my office on random Tuesdays with notes that said things like, "Thought you could use these." No reason. After 8 months, he proposed. I said yes. I know what some of you are already thinking. And honestly, I thought it too sometimes, in the back of my mind where I kept all my most honest fears. But I pushed those thoughts down. I told myself that not everyone who seems too good to be true is lying. That I was allowed to have something wonderful. That was the second mistake. The first mistake, the one I still haven't entirely forgiven myself for, was telling Chloe. I told my sister about my engagement over brunch. I showed her the ring. I watched her smile, that wide, performative smile, and say all the right things. "Oh my God, Grace, I'm so happy for you. He sounds absolutely wonderful. I can't wait to meet him." She met him 3 weeks later at my mother's birthday dinner. I watched it happen in real time and I still could not stop it. Chloe walked in wearing a dress I had never seen before. Fitted. Red. She had done something different with her hair. She sat across from Julian, and within 4 minutes they were laughing at something I hadn't heard. By the end of the night, she was touching his forearm when she made a point. He was leaning slightly in her direction when she spoke. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid, that my sister would not do this. Not this. Not the one thing I had asked, silently, every single day of my life. Just leave this one thing alone. 6 weeks later, Julian called me. He didn't come in person. He called. He said the words in the order people say them when they've rehearsed. It's not you. I've been confused for a while. I have feelings I can't ignore. I think you knew something was off. I didn't know. I hadn't known. Or maybe I had known and refused to see it because I so badly needed to not see it. I asked him quietly if it was Chloe. He paused one beat too long. Grace, I think it's better if we just... I hung up. 3 hours later, my sister came to my apartment. Not to apologize. She came wearing an expression I had never quite seen on her face before, something between guilt and victory, and guilt was clearly losing. She sat across from me at my kitchen table and said the words I want you to really hear, because they matter later. I'm sorry, Grace. But honestly, you were never high-class enough for him. You were always too quiet. Too plain. Julian needs someone who can match his energy, his world. You're better suited for someone ordinary. Someone at your level. She said it gently. That was the most insulting part. Like she was doing me a favor. Like she was a doctor delivering a diagnosis I should actually be relieved to hear. I didn't cry until after she left. And then I cried for a very long time. I was not looking for anyone when I met Arthur. I had specifically, intentionally, actively decided to stop looking. I was focusing on work. I was rebuilding the parts of my confidence that had been quietly dismantled over years of being the less impressive sister and then spectacularly confirmed useless by the man I thought I was going to marry. I was at a restaurant, a quiet place near my office where I went sometimes on Fridays to sit alone with a glass of wine and a book and exist without performing for anyone. The service was unusually attentive that evening. My water glass was never less than half full. The bread arrived before I asked. When I spilled a small amount of wine on the tablecloth and felt the flush of embarrassment start climbing my neck, someone appeared with a fresh cloth so smoothly and quickly it barely registered as an incident. I looked up and said thank you. The man standing there smiled. He was maybe mid-30s. Dark eyes. Calm face. Wearing a simple white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. No watch. No flash. Just a quiet, grounded kind of presence that felt, in that specific moment, like the first genuinely restful thing I had experienced in months. I hope the evening gets better from here, he said. Simple. No performance. It already has, I said. I don't know why I said it. I hadn't planned to. His name was Arthur. We talked for 20 minutes before I realized the restaurant had mostly emptied around us. He asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers, which sounds like a low bar, but believe me, after Julian, it felt extraordinary. When I asked what he did, he smiled a specific kind of smile. Not evasive. More like privately amused. I work in the restaurant industry, he said. I nodded. Do you like it? I love it, he said without any hesitation. There's nothing quite like creating an experience that makes people feel, even just for a couple of hours, that the world is a generous place. I thought about that answer for 3 days afterward. We had coffee the following Tuesday, dinner the next Friday. Within 6 weeks, I had introduced him to my mother, which went exactly as I expected. Sandra looked at Arthur's faded jeans and practical sedan in her driveway, and her expression did the very specific rearrangement it did when she was deciding how disappointed she was going to be. When she called me afterward, she didn't ask how I felt about him. She asked, "Is he at least a manager?" Word reached Chloe within 48 hours. It always did. My mother had a specific talent for information transfer that would have served her well in intelligence work. Chloe called me on a Sunday morning. A waiter, Grace? Seriously. He works in the restaurant industry, I said. And I like him. You always do this, she said, with that particular sigh that meant she was preparing to be generous with her disappointment. You settle. You find the first person who's nice to you, and you call it love because you're too scared to hold out for something better. Like you did. I said. Like Julian? Silence. Then, Julian treats me very well, actually. Good, I said. Then you won't need to worry about what I'm doing. I hung up. What followed over the next several months was a sustained, low-level campaign. Chloe casually mentioned Arthur's job to every family member and family-adjacent person she could find. She referred to him at gatherings, none of which he attended, because I stopped bringing him to anything involving my family, as Grace's little restaurant friend. Julian, who now apparently attended every family event on Chloe's arm, was always impeccably presented for contrast. The gold watch. The name-dropping. The stories about international travel and development deals, and the Maserati he was apparently considering in addition to the Ferrari. My mother smiled at Julian and looked through Arthur like glass. I kept Arthur away from all of it. Not because I was ashamed of him, I want to be clear about that, but because I knew what they would do. And I knew Arthur didn't deserve to sit at a table where people had already decided he wasn't worth their attention. He deserved better than that. As it turned out, so did I. We got married on a Saturday in October. The venue was beautiful. Not flashy, not trying to prove anything. Warm lighting. Round tables with simple white linens and small floral arrangements in amber and cream. A jazz quartet in the corner. The kind of setting that felt like a long exhale rather than a performance. 200 guests. Close friends, colleagues, a handful of family members including, unfortunately, my mother. Arthur's side was warm and generous and loud in the best way, full of people who hugged you immediately and meant it. The ceremony was perfect. I cried. Arthur did not cry, but his voice was unsteady when he said his vows, which was somehow more moving than tears would have been. The reception began beautifully, and then, an hour and a half in, the ballroom doors opened. I heard the shift before I saw it. The specific quality of a room's noise changes when something unexpected enters it. Conversations don't stop, they just tilt. Like everyone is subtly reorienting toward the same point. I looked up. Chloe. She was wearing a silver sequined gown that caught every light in the room. Her hair was swept up. Around her throat, a diamond necklace that I recognized. Julian had described a piece like it once, early in our relationship, as part of his family's collection. Julian walked beside her in a dark bespoke tuxedo, and in his right hand, looped around one finger, spinning in slow, casual rotations, the red Ferrari key fob. He was spinning it so that it caught the light. He was spinning it so that people would see it. It was, in its small way, the most intentional prop I had ever seen a person carry. They did not go to their seats. They walked across the dance floor. The jazz quartet faltered slightly. Conversations dropped. 200 pairs of eyes tracked them as they crossed the room and stopped, with perfect dramatic placement, directly in front of the head table. In front of Arthur. In front of me. Chloe looked around the room slowly. She let the silence build. Then she sighed, theatrical, indulgent, the sigh of someone visiting a modest relative's house and trying not to show how much better their own is. Grace, she said, her voice pitched to Carrie. I have to say, this is very quaint. Isn't it, Julian? Julian smiled. The smile of a man who was entirely comfortable being the supporting character in someone else's cruelty. Very cozy, he agreed. A few people left. My mother's friends, mostly. The ones who had always mistaken access to money for access to taste. Chloe leaned forward and placed her hands on our table. I'm just going to say what everyone in this room is probably too polite to say. She looked at me with something that might have looked like concern if you didn't know her the way I did. You traded a millionaire for a pathetic restaurant worker, Grace. You're a loser. You always have been. But don't worry, Julian and I will make sure to leave your husband a generous tip before we go. The space around our table went absolutely silent. Not the whole room. The whole room was processing, murmuring, some people looking uncomfortable, some people still smirking into their champagne. But the immediate area around us, the guests closest to the head table, had gone very, very still. I looked at Arthur. He was not flushed. He was not clenching his jaw. He was not doing any of the things people do when they are trying very hard not to show that they are hurt. He looked completely, almost eerily calm, and there was something in his eyes, a quiet, dark, deeply specific kind of amusement that I had never quite seen there before. It was the expression of a person who has been waiting patiently for a very long time for a moment to arrive and has just watched it walk through the door. He turned to me slowly. His lips were close to my ear. "Should we tell them who I really am?" he murmured. I looked at my sister. I looked at Julian, still spinning that key fob. I felt something rise in my chest. Not anger exactly. Cleaner than anger. Cooler. The feeling of a hand of cards you've been holding quietly all evening, and the moment arriving to lay them on the table. I placed my hand over Arthur's. "No," I said softly. "Let me." I stood up slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room was already leaning in. You could feel it, that collective shift of attention that happens when something is about to change. I looked at my sister first. "Chloe," I said, "thank you for coming. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to introduce my husband properly, since it seems like some people in this room have formed some opinions based on very incomplete information." I turned to face the room. "Most of you know Arthur as someone who works in the restaurant industry. That's true. What you may not know is the specific nature of that work." I paused. Arthur owns 47 restaurants across 12 states. He also holds majority stakes in 2 hotel groups, a hospitality consulting firm, and a foundation that has funded culinary education programs in underserved communities for the past 8 years. Last year, his company was valued at just over $400 million. The silence that followed was the most complete silence I have ever heard in a room full of 200 people. I let it sit there for a moment. Then I looked directly at Julian. "Julian," I said pleasantly, "I believe you've actually met Arthur before." Professionally. Julian's face did something complicated. The color shifted, not all at once, but in patches, like a tide going out. Arthur rose beside me. He was unhurried. He extended his hand across the table toward Julian with the ease of a man who was entirely comfortable in every room he had ever walked into. "Stonehaven Properties," Arthur said simply. "We reviewed your family's development proposal 14 months ago." Julian stared at Arthur's hand. He did not take it. Because Julian knew, and in that moment, everyone at the nearest tables was beginning to understand what that review had concluded. Arthur looked at me. I nodded slightly. "The proposal was declined," Arthur said, still calm, still pleasant. "Significant concerns about the financial documentation. Specifically, the family trust that was cited as the primary asset basis. Our team couldn't verify its existence through standard channels." He let that land. "I remember the meeting," Arthur continued. "I remember thinking at the time that the lifestyle presentation was considerably more polished than the underlying financials." Julian's hand, the one still holding the Ferrari key fob, had gone still. I looked at my sister. Chloe was no longer performing. The theatrical brightness had drained completely from her face. She was staring at Arthur with an expression that was trying very hard to reassemble itself into something confident, and finding it could not quite manage it. "The Ferrari," I said softly, "is a lease. I found that out 2 months ago when Julian's leasing company called the number he had on file, which was still mine, about a missed payment." A sound went through the room. Not laughter. Something more complicated than laughter. "The Rolex is real," I added, because I believed in being accurate. "But the real estate empire isn't. The penthouse was a short-term rental. The villa in Florida belongs to a college friend." I looked at my sister for a long moment. "You left me for a performance, Chloe. You humiliated me, in my own home, at my own table, in front of my family, for a man who was wearing a costume. And then you came to my wedding to do it again." My voice stayed even. I had not planned this speech. It was simply what was true, arriving in the order it needed to arrive. "I am genuinely, sincerely sorry," I said, "that this is how you found out." And I meant that. I had not planned to do it this way. She had chosen this room, this moment, this audience. I sat back down. Arthur sat beside me. He picked up his champagne glass with the easy calm of a man who had simply answered a question that had been asked of him. Chloe stood at our table for a few seconds that felt much longer. Julian said nothing. He had put the key fob in his pocket. My mother, 3 tables away, had gone the particular shade of still that meant she was furiously recalculating every social interaction she had participated in for the past 8 months and finding the math very unpleasant. It was one of Arthur's closest friends, a warm, booming man named Robert who had sat at our table through the whole exchange, who finally broke the silence by raising his glass. "To Grace and Arthur," he said, loudly and completely unironically. "The best wedding I've been to in 15 years. The room laughed. Genuinely, warmly, the way people laugh when tension releases in a direction no one expected. The jazz quartet, bless them, chose that exact moment to start playing again. Chloe and Julian left. They didn't make another scene. There was nothing left to make a scene with. They walked out the way they had walked in, except none of the cameras followed them this time. My mother came to find me an hour later, near the end of the reception. She stood in front of me with the expression of a woman who wanted to say something meaningful and was finding the vocabulary difficult to locate. "He seems," she said finally about Arthur, "very accomplished." "He is," I said. "He was always very accomplished. That was always true, whether you knew it or not." She nodded slowly. She did not apologize. But she looked, for the first time in as long as I could remember, genuinely uncertain of herself. And for my mother, that was significant. I didn't chase an apology that night. It wasn't the night for it. The night was for dancing with my husband, who danced unexpectedly well, and for laughing with his friends who treated me immediately like family, and for letting go, really letting go, of the weight I hadn't fully realized I'd been carrying. I'll tell you what I know, because you deserve the full picture. Julian's business situation became public in the weeks following the wedding. I didn't cause that. Arthur's team had flagged concerns through appropriate professional channels 14 months prior, long before I had ever met Arthur. Those things have a way of eventually finding daylight. The Ferrari went back. The apartment he and Chloe had been sharing, which she had believed was his, turned out to be in her name, because he had quietly suggested she sign the lease for what he described as tax reasons. Chloe called me 6 weeks after the wedding. The call was uncomfortable and short, and she did not apologize directly, but she said something that came close. "I should have listened to you more. When we were younger." I said, "Yes, you should have. We're not close. I don't know if we will be. But the door is not entirely closed. People are complicated. Damage is sometimes survivable." That part of the story is still being written. My mother came to our home for dinner 3 months after the wedding. She brought flowers, which she had never done in my memory. She complimented the apartment without qualifying it. She asked Arthur 3 genuine questions about his work and listened to the answers. "It's not a transformation. It's a beginning. I'll take it. Here's what I want to say to you, because this isn't just a story about a wedding. There were so many moments in my life where I accepted someone else's definition of what I was worth. Where I let the people who were supposed to love me tell me I was too quiet, too plain, too ordinary, and I filed that information away and quietly believed it. I almost didn't say yes to coffee with Arthur because I was still operating on the assumption that I wasn't someone good things happened to. Not really. Not permanently. What I've learned is this. The people who tell you that you're not enough, they are usually, at the bottom of all that noise, terrified that they are not enough. Cruelty like my sister's is never actually about the target. It is always, always about the person swinging. And the people who are genuinely powerful in this world, the people with something real to offer, they almost never need you to know how important they are the moment you meet them. They're not spinning a key fob. They're not performing for the room. They're just present. Quietly, fully, entirely present. That was the thing I noticed first about Arthur. Before I knew a single thing about his company or his success or any of the details that made my sister's jaw drop at my wedding reception. He was just there. Actually there. That was the most extraordinary thing about him. That's still the most extraordinary thing about him. If you've ever been the less impressive sibling, if you've ever sat at a family table and felt invisible while someone else got all the light, this one was for you. You don't have to prove yourself in a single dramatic moment. You don't have to wait for a wedding reception to reveal who you really are. But when the moment comes, don't let anyone else tell your story. You tell it. Thank you for spending this time with me on Velyra Payback. If this story hit something real for you, you know what to do. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And I want to ask you something before you go. Have you ever had someone underestimate you, only to be proven completely, spectacularly wrong? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. I'll see you tomorrow.